Hey class, this is the Nike lecture. So we're going to talk about the Nike changing the sneakers game. I'm going to try to make this a quick recording so you don't have to watch too much. So quickly, we're going to talk about the overarching problem, right? So if we were looking at identifying our problems, I think it's pretty obvious that the overarching problem is Nike on the right path to creating a digital strategy? Thinking also about their kind of innovations and what those look like and what they're looking like in relation to their business and their competitors. And then also what's really next for S23 NYC and their direct to consumer strategy. So we're going to really talk a lot today about direct to consumer. So I'm going to call it D2C as it relates to Nike and how they're going to get straight to their consumer. So first we want to talk about who S23 NYC is. Of course, you know that they are a digital studio owned by Nike for their digital brand. The case talks about Ron Ferris, who founded who was in support of Richard Branson's Virgin Group. I think Ferris's experience is relevant only because he worked with Virgin Mobile and really had a grasp on trying to generate that fan experience. The app that he designed, if you recall from the case, it was a mobile platform to try to engage communities and or customers while they were waiting in line for product launches. So I think his ideas really were what spawned and spurred this digital strategy arm of Nike. So I think that it's important to think about Ferris's experience, his experience in gamification, his experience in other areas that he brought to Nike. Briefly, we know that the case talks about, kind of breaks down, and this was in 2017, but kind of breaks down their place in the market. If we look at their place in the market, their primary competitor was Adidas at that time, and Nike had 36% of the share. Also relevant to know that their competitors were also Converse, which is a casual line of footwear, Hurley, and then of course the Jordan brand. So one of the key drivers for success is the growth rate of direct to consumer business. So when I say direct to consumer, I'm talking about removing the middleman altogether. So the middleman, specifically in today's world, the middleman being like a retail outlet. So Nike trying to get from the Nike production line into the hands of the consumer. In kind of a traditional sense, you have to go through maybe Dick's Sporting Goods, right, to get your Nike. Now, or I don't know, Amazon, some other way, connection, a distribution channel that Nike would have to utilize in order to get to their customer. Now we know Nike can get to their customer through their online platform. However, what S23 NYC is trying to do is get to the consumer in a different way, right? How do we get straight to the consumer without using retail outlet? Or how do we get our consumer straight to our online platform without using any other format, right? Okay, so their direct to consumer strategy focuses on 10 countries around the world with top markets. They reduced their styles, if you remember from the case, to 25% to try to offer a deeper saturation of selection, and they cut back on not all, but on many of their retail outlets, of course, which reduces overhead, and then they have to come up with ways to get the Nike products into the hands of the consumers more effectively, right? Which is kind of the crux of the course. So we know from the case that this is the digital arm, right? So this is where we are looking at the digital platforms in which Nike is utilizing to try to get straight to the consumer. So the couple of platforms on the digital side, and I'll go ahead and erase this, and I apologize for my board here. It's a little, so we know there was 4 places that Nike was really working on as it related to their platforms on their digital side through S23 NYC. Also doesn't roll off the tongue. Okay, we know they have the Nike app, which is sort of their general hub for any and all things that they're thinking about. We know that their Nike app also kind of can feed into Nike.com. And their Nike.com had this where you could make your online purchases. And we have Nike Plus, which we know that Nike Plus had 100 million members. So that 100 million members is really helpful to creating these areas that S23 NYC could really focus on. So S23 NYC's digital products or digital platforms are the Nike app, which was their general hub. We know they also have their Run Club. Okay, their Run Club was specifically for runners, right? And we know they had 2 million workouts per month, according to the case. So a very interesting place for runners to kind of connect and also purchase, right? So the Run Club would feed into Nike.com and or feed into the Nike app so that they could purchase the products. The Nike Train Club. So make sure you're understanding the difference between the two, because we're going to really look at what is this customer, right? So this is a runner. This is like more focuses, this Train Club focuses on this is actually where the 2 million workouts per month were. So the Train Club is really an important place for those that are working out, those that are managing and tracking their runs, wanting to lose weight, that they're training for marathons or Ironmans, things like that. A little bit different than just the Run Club. And then finally, the one that they kind of focused on in the case is the Sneakers app, right? And we know that the Sneakers app is specifically designed for a more sneakerhead type consumer, and really looking at how that particular sneakers customer is an important customer for Nike. When we think about the market, this is kind of something I want to talk about for a second. When we think about the basketball market, the case talks about the different types of shoes that people purchased sort of in the timeline of when basketball was popular. So we know that the basketball market was really growing rapidly in the 1960s. There's kind of basketball related shoes like Converse, Chuck Taylors. I think that it's important to think about the trends in the sneaker industry and how this trend is really like a partnership with sneaker culture, right? A partnership with trends and sneaker culture. And the alignment, we're going to come back to these, so I'm not going to erase all that, but the alignment of sneaker culture and pop culture. So if we were in class, I would ask you, what is cool, right? What is trendy? What does this mean when I'm talking about the alignment of sneaker culture and pop culture? So I would tell you, what is cool? What makes something cool? Give me some examples of things that are cool. And we would probably, in what is trendy, what makes something trendy? Why is it trendy? And we would probably come up with a lot of lists, such as, I'm just going to read off what I have on my notes here: acceptance, or hip, stylish, exclusive, new, innovative, unique, limitless, sometimes defiance of authority, sometimes a rebellion, up to date, and or stylish. And then the conversation likely would go, once something becomes hip, up to date, and stylish, and everybody buys it, or everybody has it, then what happens to it, right? Ultimately, it's no longer cool. So this idea of cool and trendy and staying hip and in alignment with pop culture is a really challenging aspect of the sneaker culture. The case also talks quite a bit about the alignment of not only pop culture, but the alignment of fashion and how fashion plays a very large role in what we wear. So a lot of people purchase, specifically sneakerheads, right? Sneakerheads, they purchase shoes to store them and or they're wearing them as fashion statements rather than for the use of shoes, which if we're looking at Run Club and or the Nike Trainer app, they're purchasing that shoe for the purpose of fitness, right? A lot of times this is not a purpose of fitness purchase. So I think it's really important that we understand that culture between popular pop culture, fashion culture, and shoe culture, and what that really looks like as it relates to the growth of Nike's direct to consumer strategy. Because there's a lot of reasons we purchase a Nike shoe, and a lot of it is not for fitness reasons. So I think that that's important when we're looking at the growth of the S23 NYC direct-to-consumer brand. A couple other key things from the case. In 2016 and 17, the athletic category of sales increased by 10%, right? So these days, people are using shoes as more of a fitness tool than they used to. Well, that was in 16, 17, so maybe not necessarily today, but COVID may have changed some of these things. So I think that this is a relevant piece of information. And then the other thing to think about is the other partnerships that Nike was involved in. And so we're going to talk specifically about what Nike is doing. And we know that there's a couple of different things that the sneakers app specifically is doing right now. So they talked about kind of 4 different things that the sneakers app is doing. And so we have drops, we have stashes, cams, and shock drops, all of which are kind of these strategies that the sneakers app or Ferris is using for S23 NYC. So your drop is your latest release of the shoe. So it's dropped on a very specific day. You have to have the Nike, or you have to have the sneakers app and or the Nike app to get that drop. A stash is location based. I think the example in the case was the Pokemon Go, right? So it's sort of that geo framing where if you're in a specific area at a specific time, have the app open, then you get information that says you can get this either access to get this shoe or access to a code that can get you this shoe. So location-based purchase options. The cams are the phone camera purchase option or the phone option, right? So I think the example in the case was the menu, that you scanned the menu and then you again got very specific access to that drop. And finally, a shock drop, which is an unannounced release. I believe the example in the case was the halftime show when Timberlake walked off the stage and then all of a sudden anybody who had that app got access to the shoe he was wearing at the Super Bowl halftime show. So I think those are all really important things to note because these are very unique and innovative and interesting ways to get this particular consumer to be engaged in your app. So it's not just about how do I get the app to my consumer, because not only do we have to get the consumer to actually download the app or have the app, but we also have to figure out how do we have them utilize the app to then make that purchase. And that's the key thing to this case, right? Is how do we get them to use it to be able to have them make this case. Okay, so when we're thinking about the things that Nike did specifically in order to kind of strategically utilize partnerships to try to develop this particular direct-to-consumer strategy. We know that they worked with Virgil Abloh, streetwear off-white label, who also worked with Louis Vuitton and constructed some old styles. Thinking about that thriving sort of secondary market and how that thriving secondary market really was maximizing the Nike's inability to get direct to consumer. If you remember from the case, that secondary market was purchasing up all of Nike's high-end products and then reselling them at maximum value, right? So Nike was recognizing, why am I not able to get this maximum value from our consumer directly? Why is eBay or StockX or Grailed able to get $90,000 for an Air Yeezy 2 when we should be able to maximize that profit, right? Okay, so the first thing they were going to do was, let me just see, my right notes here, yep. So there was a couple of different things. They did the sneakers unlock. So let's talk about that really quickly. So all these were on the sneakers app, as you know, but when we're thinking about it, we want to be strategic because that's what our next proposal is going to be about, is how do we sort of get this customer engaged. So we did the sneakers, I'm not spelling it right, but okay, they had the sneakers unlock, or I think they called it in the case gesture unlock. The example was Penny Hardaway wore blue Fashion Night ones on the court. So if you click on the story on the app, you use your finger with the Sharpie, then you can unlock a specific video, and that video directs you to purchase the shoe, right? So the sneakers unlock was an effective strategy for S23 NYC in their first year. The second one, I'll just put these as numbers. The second one was our sneakers stash. The sneakers stash was the Pokemon Go, so berry products for fans to find. The first stash was Arctic Orange Air Jordan 2, just on GG, longest name of a shoe ever. Click on the shoe, get a 360-degree view of your location, right? So again, this is that sort of geoframing, or it's called geofencing or geoframing, where if you're in a specific location, you can engage that location. So we do that at Cardinal Stadium, for example. If you're at the stadium, you open the Cards fan app, and all of a sudden you get access to, some sort of digital coupon. That geo-Frenched area, you say I'm here, and then you get access to that code to get the shoe and or access to purchase it at that time. The sneakers cam, that's the sneakers. All right, we know the sneakers cam, and I mentioned this already with David Chang, who's Momofuku. He's very famous in the food industry, but also in the fashion industry. He's kind of a sneakerhead himself. So he digitally buried a drop in his menu. Fans with AR technology could scan the menu and in his restaurant and unlock that gesture option. And then finally the shock drop, which was the fourth one. And all of these again are on the sneakers app, right? So this is the shock drop, and I think I mentioned this one as well. Surprise alerts. Justin Timberlake with his Air Jordan 3, specifically white, I believe, were available to fans. And I know the case talks about like hundreds of thousands of fans missing out on this particular product, and it really frustrating fans. So we have to think strategically about how that exclusivity is really awesome because it can engage X number of fans, but then we can also have this idea of I'm frustrated because I didn't have that option, even though I have the sneakers app, right? So we have to be thoughtful about that. I also think when we're thinking about this, we have to be strategic about how each of these consumers are maybe a little bit different. Even though this is all sneakerheads and we're looking at the sneakerhead app, each of these consumers is a little bit different, and each of these apps is launched in a different way for a different reason. So then the sneakers app really evolved. So this was season 1. So they evolved in season 2 to try a couple of different, more strategic options. The first thing, if you remember from the case, they looked at stash squads, which is teams of people. And I think this kind of goes back to that idea that people were frustrated or they were getting some sort of feedback that there was maybe fans that wished they had some options. And this stash squad, if I was in class, I would ask you what that is, and you would tell me that it allows players to sort of play together to access different types of gifts, and they can be at different locations, and it sort of utilizes different networks and really does a good job of kind of combining networks, which I think is really essential when we're talking about especially a population like the sneakerheads, right? We want these people want to engage with each other, and engaging with each other is part of the process of owning and or purchasing said shoe. So the more they're engaged with each other, the more likely it is that they're going to maybe buy this particular drop, right? The second thing they did, so this was the first thing they did in season 2. The second thing they did was the Art of Champions. If you remember this from the case, right? And the Art of Champions was more of it's kind of like bringing history into the purchase of the shoe. So the more people know about the history of Nike, perhaps the more invested they are in the purchase of this particular shoe. So stories about Nike's history, the NBA partnership, 16 stories, 16 games. They had the Kobe 1 Pro final second sneaker. For that, they did a 4 a.m. shock drop. You remember, I don't have it up here anymore, but the shock drop was the one that nobody knows about, right? So they did a 4 a.m. shock drop. The entire inventory sold by 5 o'clock in the morning. Again, thinking, how could we potentially have drawn in a larger audience with that exclusivity option? The Air Manifesto 2 Trifecta series. These have the strangest names. That's me, my old talking. They did a sneakers cam to launch the sneaker drop in China. Then the other thing that they did was the Kendrick Lamar tour. And this was an interesting partnership, and I think was very strategic when we think about how you're going to develop a direct to consumer strategy, because that's ultimately what's going to happen here. This Kendrick Lamar tour was a really interesting way for kind of that partnership. So Nike was really recognizing that those who follow the Kendrick Lamar tour are really interested. So they did a similar geofencing where if you were at one of Kendrick Lamar's shows, you were able to get the Cortez Kenny Cortez Kenny 3. You guys know the names of all these. While you're at that venue during the set, you can have access to that. So I think that this is a really great start to Nike's direct to consumer strategy. Thinking about how it progressed from season 1 to season 2, and what you're going to be looking at in your next proposal is, what does season 3 look like, right? And maybe not even necessarily using the sneakers app. Maybe there's a new form of direct to consumer that you think might make more sense than what we've got going currently here. So what I also want you to think about really quickly, because I'm trying to keep this video pretty short, is also the things that Nike is trying to accomplish on their creativity team, right? We know they want to explore new, interesting, and innovative ideas, unique concepts, aesthetics, fit, making sure that they understand the trends and what's cool again, right? So this innovation is something that's really key and pivotal to Nike's brand, and they want to hold on to that. So when you're doing your proposal, you want to really think about that, because you're going to be kind of thinking about a new shoe and what a new shoe might look like and how that new shoe might be able to get to said audience. Okay, the second thing that Nike wants to do is they want to invest. They want to invest in what's working, what's satisfying the consumer, what's driving demand, what's fueling bigger ideas, thinking about the LeBron 16s, right? And then ultimately they want to scale. Anytime we're talking about scaling in entrepreneurship, right, it's talking about growth. It's basically growth. So is Nike ultimately going to grow? The things that they talked about specifically in the case is global expansion, increased knowledge, and larger access to consumer base, right? And of course, looking back at where are they in the competitive marketplace of the shoe industry and how do they inch up further to be number one in the shoe industry. And those are those strategic expectations that Nike has that they also have for S23 NYC, right? So thinking about how they generate new ideas at S23 NYC, where they come up with the innovation to get to that investment and growth. If they maybe do focus groups, they ask people where they purchase, how they purchase, why they purchase. And I think they left with the thrill of the chase theme, which is an interesting thing to think about, right? So if Nike is really looking at explore, invest, and scale, and the consumer in their focus groups is saying, we're interested in the thrill of the chase, the idea of some of these stashes, shock drops, right, geofencing is really maybe where the consumer is or was in 2017 when this case was written. So I think that this idea has really evolved from season 1 to season 2 and really gained some traction. So what I want you to think about as we're transitioning into your proposals is what innovations are next for not only Nike, but also for S23 NYC. Does the distribution of the product matter in the design, or does the design matter in the distribution, right? So thinking about who is the customer and what shoe is it that they really want and why do they want it? Because there's a lot of different reasons that we would buy, we being the general population, that we would buy a shoe. If I'm using it, again, back to that Nike runner and or trainer app versus the consumer who uses the sneakers app, very different consumers. Thinking about culture, thinking about history, culture, music, fashion, trends, all of those things and how those really impact the design, and then also the way in which the customer might want to get to that product. And then this idea of subgroups or sub-communities. So if I'm thinking about a specific population of people, who are the subgroups within that population? So if I'm talking about sneakerheads, and I'm going to use this very generally, right? But if I'm talking about a sneakerhead, I've gone to purple now. I'm talking about a sneakerhead. Okay, who are these people? So sneakerheads, if I had 3 circles as my subgroups, like a Venn diagram, we know that they're collectors of shoes, right? We know that they like high end, that they probably maybe are high end buyers. We know sneakerheads probably might be interested in hip hop. I don't know. I'm just saying that there's cultures within the subgroup. There's subgroups within the group. So part of the challenge of this particular assignment is going to be recognizing what is your target population, and then who are those subgroups that exist within that target population that you're going to be able to identify, because then ultimately a collector might use a different direct to consumer strategy than a high-end purchaser, or somebody who is interested in hip hop might be very might be interested in a shock drop versus a high-end buyer who only wants that, I don't know, AR cam option. So I think it's really interesting to think about this when we're thinking about what to do when we want to explore, invest, and scale the Nike direct-to-consumer strategy. That's all I got for you today. Thanks.